I'm Michael Holder. I'm Deputy Editor at Business Green. And over the past year or so, for me personally, I've become a lot more aware of this issue. Speaking to people in the profession, writing several features about it, it's become increasingly clear to me that, and it's dawned on me really, just how utterly critical the accountancy profession is to the net zero transition, and how much work that can be done in the profession to drive forward what companies need to do to decarbonise. So I'm really pleased today to be joined by several leading experts in this area, and hosting this session, this workshop session, for the next hour or so in partnership with the Chartered Accountants Worldwide. And we'll be looking at just that, accounting for net zero. So we've got a fantastic lineup of experts, as I said, to take you through today's discussion. And as ever, we wanted to make it as interactive as possible. So do try and get your questions through on the chat box and any observations really, and we can try and put them to our panelists here today, because always keen to try and share best practice wherever possible. So yeah, we'll turn you over to, I'll introduce some of our speakers now. We've got Graham Gibson, who is Finance Director at Edinburgh Airport, Amir, who is Founder and President at the Global Partnerships Forum, and Stephen Prendeville, who is Head of Sustainability at EY in Ireland, and Yetunde Fidei, who is the founder at Vector Energy. So we'll start off with you, Graham. Get you all just to introduce a bit about yourself. But yeah, Graham, if you could kick off first of all, tell us a bit about your background, where you're from, and kind of your expertise in this area.
Thanks, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. Absolutely delighted to be here in the final session of the festival. I think if you'd asked me 12 months ago what the role of finance was in supporting sustainability, I don't think I would have known where to start. In fact, I might have argued that the principal role was to make sure that we didn't spend too much money on expensive consultants. But over the last 12 months or so, I've fundamentally and comprehensively changed my mind on this subject. I think that finance is critical to the success of an organisation's sustainability strategy. Edinburgh Airport, where I'm the finance director, is the sixth largest airport in the UK and Scotland's premier international gateway. It is, however, an unavoidable fact that aviation is a significant contributor to climate change and accounts for 2 to 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and that number is going to go up over the coming years. That said, there are clear economic, social and cultural benefits from air travel, but there is a carbon cost, and we recognise that as an airport and as a responsible employer and corporate entity. We know that we need to do our part to limit emissions and help the transition to a low carbon economy. There simply isn't an alternative. We've already seen in some of the more progressive countries in Europe that consumers are changing their travel preferences, particularly for domestic travel. The flight shame movement appears to be acquiring some momentum. Moreover, institutional investors are increasingly focused on ESG, and those companies with strong records attract stronger valuations and can attract access cheaper funding. Embedding sustainability in an organisation is very much about being about good business. Our contention, however, is that carbon is the enemy, not aviation. So over the coming decades, investment in sustainable aviation fuels and electric aircraft will transform our industry, but that technology still needs to develop. We launched our Greater Good sustainability strategy in June of this year with meaningful commitments to reduce emissions and a 2040 net zero target. So what then is the role of finance? Fundamentally, for me at least, finance is about helping an organisation make good decisions, from launching a new product to expanding into a new territory or choosing how to deploy our capital. We inject rigour and discipline into decision making, and we're one of the few departments that has access to a corporate level view. The approach that we've taken in my team is to identify 5 pillars where we think finance can make a meaningful difference. The first is around measurement and reporting, so identifying and setting meaningful sustainability targets and KPIs to drive change. We've developed, for instance, a balanced scorecard that identified 30 metrics across the different elements of sustainability, so not just carbon, but across all facets of sustainability, with clear ownership and accountability. The metrics are reported to our board sustainability subcommittee and will help convert our long-term aspiration into short-term action. The second pillar is about funding, accessing broader pools of capital and reducing the cost of funding. So, for instance, we recently issued a £100 million sustainability-linked loan, one of the first airports in the UK to do that, with pricing linked to performance across a basket of sustainability KPIs. We very clearly have skin in the game now. The third pillar is decision support, so using our finance toolkit and skill set to embed sustainability at the heart of decision making. So, for instance, our team has been front and centre in developing the business case to build an on-site solar farm that will provide up to 25% of our electricity needs. And capturing the cost of carbon in our appraisal methodology was an important element in securing the board's support for this project. Another good example is embedding sustainability in our airline pricing model. So we don't control airline emissions, as you would expect, but we can positively influence behaviour through our pricing, so using incentives. The fourth pillar is around disclosure and transparency, so providing clear and insightful information to investors. That is increasingly important, and we will voluntarily adopt the TCFD recommendations in our 2021 annual report. And finally, the fifth pillar is about data and technology. So finance is skilled at controlling and managing large volumes of financial information and providing the tools to interpret it. There's no reason why this approach cannot be extended to non-financial sustainability data. We've recently extended our data warehouse to capture energy consumption metrics, and over the coming months, we want to start capturing our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions information. So there's a lot going on. We've still got a lot to do. Much of the activity is a bit rough around the edges. I'll be the first to admit that. And we need to extend our approach to the supply chain and provide support to help reduce emissions that are not directly within our control, which is most of the emissions at Edinburgh Airport. But back to my earlier comment about where to start, my advice to any finance team struggling with this question is to consider the following words of advice. So one is to start small. Not every organisation can justify a team of sustainability specialists in finance. Focus on what is achievable, pick off the easy wins, and recognise that Rome wasn't built in a day. I'll be the first to admit that our cost of carbon methodology is a bit rough around the edges, but it is helping us make the right decisions. It's aligning the business with sustainability. And a good example of how we've used that is we used the methodology to justify a transition from fossil fuel gas to green biogas, so using an internal price for carbon. Second bit of advice is about changing the culture. So there's no value in one person being the sustainability lead while the rest of us get on with our business as usual activity. So I think sustainability should be part of everyone's objectives, whether they're in finance or not. I think the tone from the top needs to be clear and unequivocal, and I think there needs to be investment in training and upskilling for finance people, as well as those in more traditional sustainability roles. Third piece of advice is around measurement. Setting out the strategy is the easy bit. Setting out a net zero target is relatively easy. I think implementing it is much, much harder. And only finance can quantify the benefits, prioritise investment, drive performance, and provide assurance to the board that we are on track. The fourth element, or the fourth piece of advice, is about being confident. So no one department can deliver sustainability. We all have a role to play, and I include finance as much as any other department. And I think we need to be assertive and confident about inserting ourselves into the key conversations, forums, committees, and discussions. So final comment is that the world is changing and finance needs to change with it. We already have the tools to drive sustainability performance the same way that we already drive economic and trading performance. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graham. Yeah, it's absolutely right. Really is a new frontier, I think, for the financial profession, and really we're learning from scratch, a lot of us. We'll come on to you now, Amir from Global Partnerships Forum. I don't know if you could just perhaps say a bit about yourself and your kind of expertise and your initial thoughts on accounting for net zero.
Thank you, Michael, and very interested to hear what Graham has been saying. Graham is really the centre of attraction for the Glasgow Summit, actually. So all eyes are on you, Graham, and what you're doing, and it's very exciting. So I'll talk a little bit about what the UN has been trying to do, and for a number of years, climate has been top of the agenda. The Paris Agreement, Paris Accord, what is commonly known as, signed in 2015, set the target of 1.5%, and yet where we are now, we are struggling. Just last week, the UN hosted a number of heads of state and government. And while the discussions were about response to COVID-19, etc., one eye was on how do we address the climate challenge, which we are now seeing in action, unfortunately, with hurricanes and cyclones and the impact on coastal communities and so on. Yesterday, the Secretary General was in Milan to point out that what is called the nationally determined contributions from the G20 countries alone were responsible for 80%, by the way, of the emissions, the global emissions. They've pledged action, but the action has not taken place. So we are in a bit of a dire situation, and we are counting on the fact that COP26, which is the Glasgow summit, starting at the end of October, 31st of October, runs till the 12th of November, will come up with concrete actions. So in accounting terms, there's a debit and there's a credit to this, if I were to simplify it. The debit is we have CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, which is really impacting the environment pretty badly, and affecting climate crisis around the world. And the credit, which has started really not by governments, but by the private sector, is about increased use of renewable energy. So if you see electric vehicles, they're coming together despite government intervention. Private sector, individuals are starting to say, maybe I should start using electric vehicles. There used to be a subsidy. Some of the subsidy has dissipated, but there's continues to be a lot in buying EVs. If we were to be in a situation where we say we will have EVs by, let's say, in the next 20 years, you could have a major impact. But the greenhouse gas emissions continue to be a challenge. Last week, the UN hosted also what is called the Food System Summit, the first ever summit, bringing together private sector, civil society, NGOs, governments, of course, and so on. And one of the key topics of discussion was how do you think of using plant-based food and plant-based systems and reduce the reliance on meat. Methane gas has been a challenge for the environment through agriculture and animals. And now there is a kind of a widening coalition of countries, farmers as well, who are saying, let's see if we can use plant-based food. There's better protein options and so on. Now, at the end of the day, we have to reduce the coal-based power, for example. And commercial banks, private lenders need to do their own, their part. They need to play their part to try and provide the lending facilities, enabling environment to phase out coal, basically. The UN has set up a $100 billion fund, just to give you some idea, on financing climate action. So guess where we stand? We've just received 25% of that. And it's really, the 100 billion is minuscule. Developing countries, for example, need about $70 billion a year for adaptation and to change their modus operandi, to try and move from fossil to renewable energy. And the thing what is happening now is young people are taking the lead. Young people are saying, enough is enough. We've got many people arguing that people like us, have a responsibility for the future generation, and we're not doing enough. So what can we actually do? I think there are various ways, and I just want to mention, Michael, thank you for talking about what the Global Partnerships Forum does. Our mission is very simple. We focus on innovative partnerships and collaboration that can help advance the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, these goals, which are all of us relate to them one way or another, whether it's poverty alleviation, better health, better education, better infrastructure, and so on. Each one of these goals lend themselves to climate action, to the preservation of our planet. So Graham listed out some concrete actions he's taking, and I'd like to suggest 5 things companies can do to make that difference. One is to go back and reimagine all of our waste habits. See how we address waste and how we recycle it, how we encourage that. To do that, you must raise awareness amongst employees and customers. Now, the third one, of course, is business travel. As you know, an unintended positive consequence of COVID-19 has been the reduction in travel. Guess what happened? Air travel reduced, road travel increased. In the United States, for example, there has been a surge in purchase of vehicles, cars, like almost like a 32% increase in traffic on the road. So last year was a quiet period. This year, we've come back to using vehicles. So the sooner we have electric vehicles, we might address some of these gaps, if you like. The other thing is, we need to address the supply chain issues. We need to help the suppliers provide sustainable supply chain programs. So that, by the way, requires accountants asking the right questions. In other words, for every purchase order, major contract, and so on, they can simply put in a question. How do you address sustainable issues when you supply us goods and services, for example? Are you reducing your footprint? And just the fact that you're starting to ask these questions, and I want to echo what Graham said, Rome wasn't built in a year. So we're not asking that this be an overnight change, because it will not happen, unfortunately. But once you have awareness of this issue, those who are not aware of it will start to think and try and figure out how can they take some of these steps that are more energy efficient. And talking about energy efficiency, we need to figure out ways to cut down our energy consumption. I remember about 20 years ago when we started the issue of energy use and consumption came about. British Gas used to send you some 10 points. Switch the lights off, use different type of equipment. And now we've got all of the makings of making it more efficient use. The old air conditioners need to be thrown out with new systems to be put in. Smart lighting is starting to be put in. Smart thermostats and so on. So there are many things as accountants, as CFOs, people can do. Most important thing is ask the right questions and encourage not only employees, not only suppliers, but also customers. Because while we respond to the customer's needs, sometimes the customers would benefit from learning how your company is making a difference. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Amir. Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I think the influencing role of accountants is such a huge part of this, and hopefully we'll get to discuss that a little bit more as we go on. But we'll come to you next, Stephen from EY. Tell us a bit about your background and your role at EY, and I suppose your role working with clients on this issue, and many accountants on accounting for net zero.
Thanks very much, Michael, and good evening from Ireland, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here on the capstone of the event of the 3 days at the Net Zero Festival. You know, I feel like I've had this conversation a couple of times today. You'll be glad to know the Chartered Accountants Ireland Council sat down for a strategy session this morning and asked themselves this very question on the future role of the accountant in the context of net zero. And I will open in very similar terms with you all here, that it is ironic that net zero is not an accounting term, and therefore accounting for it will be a significant challenge. Indeed, when we think about carbon and we think about the carbon emissions and the sustainability journeys that all of our companies need to go on, we need to start thinking about it as we think about a brand new monetary system, with all of the implications that go along with that. So if you want to think about every euro or dollar that we have and we account for right now in our current monetary system, we have a shadow monetary system in carbon that must be linked. It is, for those of you that watch Stranger Things out there, it is the upside down part of our economy. It is the piece that nobody is talking about, and yet it is having such a perverse negative effect on our environment, slowly changing our atmosphere, and now much more rapidly showing us what has happened with the build-up over time. Accounting for net zero is going to fundamentally change so many disciplines, including accountancy. And I know we will speak to the accountancy side of it right now. And thank you, Amir. EY is consistently asking better questions to try and build a better working world. And it is true that the accountant, the professional skeptic of the accountancy discipline, is going to be essential in holding companies and industries to account on this journey, because we should make no bones about it. We've really just been talking about the plans for the change up until now. Not many people have actually made any real big significant changes, things that change their provisions on their balance sheets, or things that might result in a revaluation of assets. Anything like that has not occurred at this point. But I put it to you that as a profession and as a group all listening in on this, we must ask ourselves, what would be material on a set of financial statements when it comes to sustainability? As a profession, we provide a true and fair assessment, a true and fair opinion as to the veracity of a set of financial statements. How is the accountant going to be able to do that for sustainability financial disclosures? And look, quite frankly, it's even tough to think about structuring the tests for such things when the alphabet soup of financial reporting requirements and CSRDs and SASBs and SFRDs and, you know, all the four-letter acronyms in the world that are going on at the moment, jostling for position in our minds on how to measure and manage sustainability. But how are we going to test it? And what is the profession's response going to be to questions on how to provide that comfort to shareholders, that comfort to stakeholders? So we shouldn't underestimate the significance of this change. Just before this event, I spoke at Grads Ireland, where you know, it's that time of year where we're doing all of the recruiting for new graduates in the accountancy world. And I put it to them that we are at a point in time where we're going to shake up multiple professions in a way that we haven't done in 100 years. If you think about it, we are talking about setting up the structures and the disciplines of profession in place for a new monetary system. I'll give you a little bit of background on me now, Michael, if I may. And actually, this has been a big week for us in EY in Ireland. We as a global firm, we launched our commitment to be net zero in 2025. We made that commitment in January of this year, and since then, it's fallen to me in my role as head of sustainability and my colleagues within EY Ireland to actually figure out how to achieve that. I'm sure everyone out there has had a CEO step out and make a big commitment to sustainability, and then it falls to others to kind of actually put the structures in place to achieve it. So that's what we've been doing for the last 9 months. And I can tell you, even in we're no Edinburgh Airport. You know, we've got a pretty simple business model in terms of what generates carbon for us. And unfortunately, Graham, we'll take our foot off your throat on this. Again, it was business travel that was kind of flagged up as our big emission footprint. But business travel for us is essential in terms of delivering for our clients, and it's our clients that are the ones that we are trying to serve when we travel. So we knew that we needed to address it, but we also knew that we have a commitment to be effective for our clients. And so actually, most of the things we've been doing has been optimizing. You know, we had professionals that would, you know, fly to London for a 2-hour meeting and then fly back. those days are done. If someone has to get on a plane now and fly to London, they're basically locked out of being able to return on the same day. They must structure more meetings while they're in London. They must maximize the opportunity of that carbon. And it really is just about treating every ton of carbon with the respect that it deserves in terms of like net zero. And I'm sure this was said on earlier sessions. It's not actually zero. We're not looking to get to actual zero carbon. Like this isn't going to be some perfect end result where there's no carbon produced in the economy. Net zero is that balanced level of carbon that allows us to keep our atmosphere, our climate under control, under that 1.5 degree temperature range. And so really in that acknowledgement, it is all about optimizing and maximizing and treating every single ton of carbon with the respect that it deserves and not taking it for granted. So we've been on that journey, and what actually came, and I would encourage this of all the countries in the world, what we actually found amongst our clients as we were talking to them was that they hear all of this stuff about sustainability, and some of our biggest public companies and some of our big global multinationals, they're all talking about it. But are indigenous businesses talking about it? Are the businesses where the majority of the accountants are actually supporting business operations and supporting strategy deployments, are those medium-sized enterprises talking about sustainability? And so we launched a piece of research on Earth Day to try and see, were Irish indigenous businesses actually taking this seriously? And we had the results of it. We published our State of Sustainability at EY Ireland for 2021 this week, and it actually showed that only 20% of those businesses have science-based targets. Of those that have carbon reduction goals, whether they're science-based or not, 2/3 of them were extremely anxious that they would not actually achieve their 2030 goals. An anxiety I think that a lot of people are experiencing just in the context of 2030 all of a sudden it feels much closer. And what we found was people are exhausted. There's a green fatigue almost that has gotten into everybody, and it's the IPCC's report in August was a very, very important report. But I think coming out of lockdown, it was also kind of one of those, another bash for people in their kind of emotional psyche and readiness for what has to occur. So we posit at EY that we need to start casting sustainability and casting the journey of net zero as a value-led opportunity, as something that we can win at. And this is kind of now very much in the psychological, that national psyche kind of space. But when you're winning, you keep winning. We have to build in the quick win mentality at the front end, and then build momentum, a small step that builds greater and greater momentum. I've seen these carbon reduction plans, to 2030, and it's kind of like little boxes, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they stop in 2030. And my question is, what's the reduction target in 2031? Because you'd like to think that we will keep the momentum going after 2030. And that's the point. This isn't actually a marathon to 2030, it's a marathon to 2050. So I honestly, I think that, and if everybody that's watching out there, all the advocates, all of the people that feel like they are carrying this message and they are trying to get people to listen, and they're sounding the alarm bell, I think we can do better if we start showing people the absolute value of pursuing this, the real wins, the real gains. Now, look, for someone like Graham, that means taking a long view of what success might mean. But, this is intergenerational. The long view is the only view. So I'll leave it there, Michael. Give it back to you. I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Stephen. Yeah, fascinating. I like the idea of sort of treating carbon with the respect it deserves. I haven't really thought of it like that before. The general thought is to not treat it with respect, so we want rid of it. But you're right. I mean, it is just, it's going to be there, and trying to think about every ton and what we should be doing with it, and how we should be careful with how we use it. It's really important. So we'll come back to some of those uses hopefully. But yeah, finally we'll speak to Yatunde. I don't know if you could perhaps explain us, for those that don't know, what Vector Energy does, and the role perhaps that you see for accountancy in the business there.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I'm so excited about this workshop. I like how Stephen described this. He said it's like the upside down. You know, I'm a fan of Stranger Things, so it really got to me. About a month ago, I had the opportunity to be a part of this youth consultation organized by the United Nations Energy, and the SRSG, Damilola Ogubi, was in attendance, and she highlighted that we needed about $6.9 trillion per year until 2030 to meet our net zero. Beyond this, everything else is just talk. If there's no money, we can't exactly do anything. And this made me realize that finance is a crucial element to achieving our global net zero. There is no road to net zero without, you know, creative and strategic financial services, and we need that funding to be able to manage this transition. I feel like net zero as a word has been overused. I mean, it sounds way wishy-washy, but literally speaking to it is basically like the pluses and minuses of GHG emissions, like Amir described. And for an accountant, I would say it's credit debit. You have to make sure there is a balance, so to speak. And in the advent of greenwashing and the methods of carbon credits being susceptible to old legacy credits or complicated carbon tax systems, businesses need to do things differently. Businesses across the world need to adopt sustainable capitalism, or what Paul Homan describes as the net positive movement, to attract sustainable finance, to incentivize the integration of long-term ESG framework, not just for the benefits of their investors or stakeholders, but basically stakeholders across, boards, from their employees to the customers, to the suppliers. Because the highest profile manifestation of sustainable finance is the ESG, and this is also an inclusive pillar for sustainable capitalism. I mean, from what Stephen said, it's not just applicable to multinationals. This net zero is not just applicable to multinationals. Startup. And because the UK private sector is not just made up of the Fortune 500 or the multinationals, it's also made up of SMEs and lots of startups, which I have the opportunity to be founding one. And I believe that SMEs, startups have the capacity to deliver innovative and technological driven business models to completely overhaul the traditional business practices to enable the transition to net zero. Take, for example, with Vector Energy, we manufacture heavy-duty portable power stations, which is not necessarily new in the market, although it's an innovation because we've been able to leverage on several competitors' excesses and also bring out a customer-centric product. And we've, just developed it in such a way that we've been able to incentivize users to adopt our portable power stations away from the fossil fuel options and hasten this transition by providing some sort of passive income through the carbon savings, turning it into local currency to enable them to buy groceries or donate to their favorite charity. I mean, this is our own USP to deliver the bottom line and to also enable our customers embrace net zero. So this is our business model. This is how we use sustainable finance to enable this net zero. Every organization needs to steer towards net zero, and I feel like it's the responsibility of the CEO to empower the CFOs to engage investors, to deliver models that is ultimately compatible with the net zero. Take, for example, if you're going to value your company, most companies, if not all, don't even go through the process of including the climate risks and opportunities into the valuation, and climate is a very, very important, in fact, a significant financial risk and threat to long-term value. So if it's not included, then that means valuation is not being done right. And I believe that with this insight, like with the right insight and understanding of the climate risk, companies are able to, steer better to decarbonize and also, share the stories with investors to get more funding to grow their businesses. This is what we're working on at Vector Energy. Like, we're trying to use this story to drive investors, because obviously we're still raising funding and all. And I'd like to suggest that startups like us and even small and medium enterprises practice this. I'd also like to state that accounting it's not just about being a bookkeeper. There are several ways CFOs, accountants in this entities can play a huge difference. And one is knowing the emissions. So if you know the emissions that arise from the business model, from the products, from the services, you can also benchmark it. And the CFOs have the responsibility to monetize these emissions, to include them into the financial reporting. And that's why you have, I think, carbon quotient to, help carry out this framework, do your GHG emissions inventory and set KPIs to improve. So if businesses could integrate the information of the climate information into their strategy and risk management, it would help them highlight their carbon risk and opportunity, and also see where they can, improve their business, either identifying decarbonization options, say, for example, switching from fossil fuel to renewables, or having more climate-friendly solutions that sponsor cradle-to-cradle life cycle analysis. So I also think that businesses can also tell that story. When you do all this, you can bring it to the board meeting, you can put it on your website, you tell the story, communicate how your organization is making this commitment towards net zero, because beyond climate as just a marketing to or a greenwashing exercise, as some would practice, CFOs have the ability to make this a part of the equation, and obviously they have to be empowered by the CEOs to be able to do that. And I also reckon that if they are not able to do this, then there is no way we can, achieve net zero, because every accountant needs that measurement, that evaluation to be accountable. And if they don't have that transparent or documented financial measures towards this carbon risk, there cannot be accountability for net zero. So, and if there's not accountability, there are no results. So the role of the accountants have moved from, like I said, bookkeeping to being influential business advisors capable of implementing the ESG framework to deliver a low carbon future. And that's one of the tenets that we reckon with at Vector Energy. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Yatunde. Yeah, really fascinating to hear about the work that you've been up to there at Vector Energy and beyond. I mean, as you explained there, I mean, it's so different for a smaller company and SMEs and startups than it is for a large multinational trying to get a handle on all the different accountancy work that needs to be done. I thought just to kick off, we've had a few questions coming through the floor, so I'll start with that. But I wondered, first of all, perhaps Stephen, you could speak to this a little bit. But we've had a question about internal carbon pricing. I know there are some companies that have been doing this. Microsoft, I think, have been doing it quite a few years, and some of these larger companies. What's your view on companies doing this? Do you think it's something that is a tool that can be really helpful? Is it becoming more common? Is it something EY perhaps is considering itself? What are the advantages you would say for carbon pricing?
Well, one, it's common. Not many people are doing it. And I think they're not doing it because they're afraid of the answer. Look, everywhere in this country, like everywhere in the world coming out of COVID, has these major infrastructure programs, trillions of dollars going into building stuff. None of those have been subjected to a carbon shadow price or calculation, because much and all as we want to get on with sustainability, we also want to put all those people to work, and no one wants to have the political conversation about what we're going to do from a carbon perspective in that regard. I know you mentioned Microsoft, and there are other companies that do have a shadow price of carbon, but you need to look no further than the UK government, who have a shadow price of carbon built into their decision making at the moment, £235. That's significantly different than what the trading system is likely to be, about £55 a ton. The European trading system at the moment at about £60 a ton. Ireland is going to target a carbon footprint or a carbon price of about €100 a ton by 2030. But the price that's been set by the UK government is fundamentally a reflection of what we're seeing in a lot of the dialogue, the social cost of carbon. So it's almost taking a higher inflation on the value of carbon again, in terms of its impact on the environment and its long-term impact. When you think about a ton of carbon goes in the atmosphere for 1,000 years, it seems like it's probably worth more than €60 or £55, and there's no getting away from that. So I guess to the second branch of your question, Michael, would it be helpful? Yes, it would be helpful even just to know it, and to have it illuminated, that and maybe consciously understand that that's what we're doing when we spend money on infrastructure, and when we and some of that is essential infrastructure like water upgrade infrastructure and stuff like that. And I'm not bashing infrastructure. I'm actually an infrastructure professional. We need that stuff, but we should be we can't bury our head in the sand. And I think that's where those tools really come to the fore, in terms of just having the knowledge. Now, I'll give you an example of where this gets really tricky. We have a carbon calculator for all of our engagements that we've deployed in EY since the middle of this year. And it's designed so that we can have a discussion with our clients about the carbon footprint of the assignment they have tasked us with. And that has proven to be a very difficult conversation in many scenarios, because the client often are under an awful lot of pressure from investors or from their banks or just from their financial reporting. And now their consultant, who our relationship has always been to solve challenges for them, we are coming to them and we're saying, listen, we've done everything we can to reduce the carbon footprint of this assignment, but there's still some. It's X. Is that okay? And, I guess we're not used to that conversation as a profession. Our clients are certainly not used to us coming to them with that. It's almost one of those things like you don't want to talk about. It's almost like talking about fees. You don't want to talk about fees until you have to talk about fees. But it's a fact of life. It's part of what living is. And those shadow prices of carbon and embedding them, I think, in everything we do is just a way of bringing carbon onto that stage of a monetary system again. Like we just have to know. We have to talk about it.
Well, thanks, Stephen. It's perhaps come to you, Graham. Is it something that you talk about behind the scenes at Edinburgh Airport? Is it something? How do you go about calculating carbon there? You say obviously to an extent there's stuff that you can't do about the planes coming in and out of the airport, but presumably you still have to know about the carbon calculation of the business.
Yeah, so we have a shadow price for carbon at Edinburgh Airport. It's £50 a tonne. We introduced this methodology about a year ago, and I would describe it as a game changer because it aligns sustainability with financial performance, and it helps us make decisions that are future-proofed. So we can choose to ignore carbon now, make an investment decision, which we'll then live with for the next 30 years over the life of that asset, or we can reflect the cost of carbon up front, because if we don't reflect the cost of carbon, a decision or an outcome will be foisted upon us by regulators or lawmakers, and we will end up paying through the nose for that carbon over 30 years. So it's all about future-proofing and incentives. I think it's very difficult to hardwire sustainability into a very commercial operation if there isn't a kind of financial angle to it. So financializing sustainability is the way that we've gone about securing support from our board and our shareholders and across the business. And it comes back to the point I made earlier about sustainability is just good business sense. And this is the way that we've gone about doing it. And there's tangible things that we've done because of our shadow carbon price. As I said, we've migrated to green gas. We're starting to use hydrotreated vegetable oil in our non-electric vehicles. We used it in our solar business case. So there's a number of applications, and I do think it's fundamental.
Brilliant. Thanks, Graham. What about are there any other? Obviously, with the role of accountants, have got such a sort of influential role and a nudging role in many ways. Are there any other things that that you're doing at Edinburgh Airport, or that you can be doing to nudge your supply chain, and does that flow from having a carbon price? Do you think once you've got that in place, you can then sort of go out to your supply chain, go out to other people that you work with, and say, hey, work with us on this, and we can try and make a difference?
That's the long-term objective. At the moment, we're focused on our own operations, our own emissions, perhaps to a less extent our airlines, but the supply chain emission quantum probably dwarfs what we're doing at Edinburgh Airport. We are hardwiring carbon emissions into our procurement selection processes. We're not yet at the stage of penalising bidders who have a more carbon intensive bid than someone else, but that's the direction of travel. So I think within a few years, we'll be at that place.
Yatunde, I don't know, perhaps you could speak to this a bit. I mean, just on the role of accountants in terms of influencing other companies that they work with and working perhaps within the business as well. How difficult is that within a smaller business in a startup? And what advice would you give to accountants really looking to do some work that influences their supply chain, or even indeed influencing other people within the business?
Okay, thank you for the question. For smaller businesses, they've got small budgets and they are forever looking to raise funding. I want to believe that if there is an incentive to move smaller businesses to want to do net zero right, they would subscribe to it. So for example, like I stated earlier, for Vector Energy, what I discussed, knowing the emissions, integrating the climate risks and the into strategy and management framework, and also telling the story helps us to reach impact VCs, get investment to do more of the work, right? So if SMEs could apply the same, it would essentially work for them. And the role of accountants in this is to prompt the CEO to see reasons to why they should be doing this. And also CEOs should take the initiatives to employ CFOs or accountants that can do the work, not just bookkeeping, but also implement and actively document the reporting, the GHG reporting into their financials. So at the end of the day, they're not just valuing the company based on revenue, they're also valuing the company based on the net zero framework, the ESG framework too as well. No company should, as a matter of fact, I think every company should be involved, not just SMEs, but also big multinationals and all that. But SMEs in particular, because they are the backbone of our economy. Over 90% of the UK's economy rely on SMEs. So it is highly critical that they are part of it. And also the government can also help with the process, with the policies to actively engage the SMEs to be able to subscribe to this. Because if anyone is left behind, then we are not making progress.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thanks, Yutendi. I'm conscious we've got sort of 5 or 6 minutes left, but I wondered, Amir, perhaps if you could quickly just speak to sort of awareness about this. Really, it's for me and perhaps a lot of people working in the financial world, it's something that has come to us relatively recently, perhaps in the last couple of years, and really trying to get to grips and understand what we've got to do and turn, as Stephen was saying, these sort of measurement into action. But for a lot of the world, I don't know if you give a global perspective on the accountancy profession more generally in business. Is there much awareness of the kind of real opportunity and tools and ability for the accountancy profession to really drive some change here, do you think?
Thank you. That's a very important question. I really appreciate this. I want to take you back about 30, 35 years when the Institute has started talking about green accounting and so on. We went through a phase of environmental impact assessments on big projects and so on. Then it fizzled out. The idea initially was that we should have a regular financial statement, income and expenditure account, balance sheet, but also have a green accounting process to demonstrate what we're doing. Now it's come back to the fore. I think all of the, Graham mentioned, and Stephen as well, we still don't understand. We talk about climate impact, we talk about net zero, but we still don't understand how it impacts us in concrete ways. It's a big, very important topic. We kind of relate it on a grand scheme of things when there's flooding, high tides, hurricanes, etc. So at the end of the day, I think there is a case to be made for the Institute to do two things. One is to raise awareness by simple facts of what is climate change, what is net zero, because that's going on. The Paris Accord called for certain actions. COP26 will lead to some, hopefully, some further commitments. And by the way, EU, UK, US, and China, they are the largest emitters of GHG. So the challenge has been, developing countries are saying, the poorer countries, well, why are you trying to tell us to do things when you are the ones who created this? So we need to be adjusted. You need to help us get out of this. So there's that, I'm sorry to tell you, the traditional north-south battle going on. And within the finance community, they're saying, I have a responsibility to my shareholders and the community at large, but shareholders on the bottom line. So if you tell me to increase my costs, my capital expenditures to reduce the impact of climate change, then I will not be, my company won't be that value. So it's a tug of war, and we need to raise that, create that as a global campaign, not leave it to the politicians to do that, but the business community to take the lead. And within the business community, of course, being biased, accountants tend to be more respected when it comes to making pronouncements, because they will not say things which will be out of line and, if you like, out of sync. So their trust factor is key to this. And I would recommend it be a two-step process. One is on the substance, the other is raising awareness. So form and substance take an equal share of this. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Amir. Conscious that I think Stephen's got to leave us shortly, but and we've got sort of about 6 or 7 minutes left. But it'd be really interesting to go to each of you perhaps and just get sort of perhaps one piece of advice or one message, quite clear and succinct, that you'd like to get across for accountants working around the world, perhaps working within a business. What's the kind of top tip that you would give them? And Stephen, perhaps if you could go first of all.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. The one thing I would give everybody to think about in their roles is to try and be future oriented in what you're focusing on and what you're concerned with. I think as the accountancy profession, and many people will know, we tend to be more focused on the quality of our reporting backwards. What happened last quarter, what happened last year, are we measuring that correctly, and so on. And what gets measured gets dealt with, and it's important. But where the accountant and where other professionals in this net zero journey need to really think about how they can be behavioral nudgers, how they can use whatever influence they have within their organization to manipulate the outcomes in the positive for sustainability. And I think everything that we do should be aimed at that kind of manipulation. I use the example of, we all need to be a little bit Tom Sawyer on painting the fence. We need to make painting the fence look like it's the best job in the world. And I think everyone out there needs to orientate themselves to that as their goal, making tomorrow a better than today, and worrying less, I think, about what we've done in the past, and worry more about the thing you can do today that influences the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. And perhaps go to you next, Graham. What's your kind of top piece of advice? What's the kind of take home that you'd like to give people from this session today? And what would you say to accountants working in this area now, just coming through this issue of accounting for net zero?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this during the opening remarks, but finance has the skill set and the toolkit to drive performance economically and from a trading perspective, and there's no reason why you couldn't apply that to the new language of sustainability. So for me, it's all about using the same rigor and discipline that we've been applying for generations, but in a new environment. And I think we're perfectly placed to do that.
Great, thanks, Graham. Yatunde, I don't know if there's something, a sort of piece of takeaway advice, or a singular kind of mission or issue that you'd like to put to people and say, this is what someone starting out in a business, working within the accountancy role or finance, that they should take away from you today. Yatunde, I don't know if can you hear me right?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you right now.
Okay.
The takeaway would be collaboration. It's not a goal that we can single-handedly fulfill. We've got to work together. SMEs working with big companies working nicely with the government nicely with CSOs, just to achieve this goal, so to speak. For accountants, I believe that companies, entities, private entities can, if they do not know about it, prefer some sort of training for them, or take them on a short course to be able to understand this, so they can imbibe it into their organization and make it work. The organization in itself needs to enable the accountant, because as it was said earlier, net zero is not a word that is so prominent with accountants. Even though it's overused by everyone, it's not something that they know how to implement, and so we need that capacity building to be instituted for them to be able to take this action. And like I said, we need collaboration to make this work, not just for the SMEs, but together with the government and big entities. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Yatunde. And Amir, obviously we've got a good, really important couple of months coming up, and you've mentioned COP26 as well, but are there any kind of concrete things that are going to happen at COP26, or even that you would give advice for that accountancy professionals should be doing, that you'd like to take away today?
Thank you. I think it's quite clear that accountants can play a role. It doesn't have to be too complex, too pushy. Yatunde mentioned very clearly that, look, SMEs have a role to play in this, and SMEs have a small budget. But if they can be a voice and an action platform, both, that could make a difference. Last Friday, we hosted an event on food convergence innovation at the United Nations as part of the UN Food Summit. And it was focused on science-based approach, innovation, but also convergence of supply chain to make it more effective, more efficient, with an eye out to climate issues. Because agriculture is one of our mainstay in the global economy. Like SMEs represent 66% of the world economy. So our goal is to see how FCI, what we call food convergence innovation, can be utilized in ways that can help address some of the climate vagaries. And we are helping developing countries, especially in Africa, to put together packages which can help their communities. And we are confident, by the way, that COP26 will result in some path-breaking ideas. What we're hoping is some countries will come up and say, here's our commitment, not to 2050. 2030 is down the road, by the way, so might be 2035 and so on. And if you drop coal-fired plants, for example, you go into electric vehicles, so you move fossil to renewable, you figure out GHG, landfills, for example, by the way, as a result of petroleum-based products, and by the way, 99% of the plastic comes out from petroleum-based products. So countries are starting to address that issue. So landfill impacts 15% of the greenhouse gases. And I think governments need to do something once the private sector can implement those programs. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Amir. That's about all we've got time for in today's workshop. Yeah, thanks so much for everyone, all the experts taking part today. We've got thanks to Graham, Yutundi, Stephen, who's already gone, and Amir. Yeah, I suppose just to wrap up, I mean, my job as a journalist is to sort of tell some of these stories, and it is about awareness to a certain extent. And I know for me and some of the people I've spoken to, it's been fascinating to see actually what starts off as an accounting role, what starts off as kind of measuring the emissions at a business, small or large, and then seeing how that turns into actionable plans on the ground, be that not just setting targets, but also companies that have sort of realized where their emissions are and where their cost savings can be. And they've made investments into some really exciting changes in their business. Yeah, so that's about all we've got time for today's Net Zero Festival, the final day of the 3. So thanks so much for joining us all. And yeah, hope we can all see you again next year. Really fantastic to chat about some of these issues with some leading experts as ever. We'll see you next year. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael.